This evening, I find no enthusiasm in my voice, and no particular desire to speak at length, and yet there is a pressure, an inner insistence that this subject must be voiced, not because it is popular, and not because it is new, but because it is pressing itself upon human consciousness everywhere. You may have noticed that fear today does not announce itself as fear. It comes disguised as information, as responsibility, as concern for the world, as prudence, even as love for mankind. And yet, beneath all of this, there is a subtle agitation, a restlessness of thought, a constant inward motion that never quite comes to peace. We are not dealing tonight with personal fear. If this were merely personal fear, it could be handled by reassurance, by comfort, or by improved circumstances. But what confronts the world today is not a collection of individual anxieties. It is a mental atmosphere. It is something moving through the collective thought of humanity, pressing itself upon those who are awake and those who are asleep, upon the religious and the irreligious alike. And because it is impersonal, it cannot be healed by personal effort. Scripture has already named this condition, though few have recognized it. Paul spoke of it when he wrote, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world." He was not speaking of devils or entities. He was describing states of belief, accepted assumptions, universal pressures of thought. He was pointing to the fact that mankind lives under influences it did not consciously choose and reacts to fears it did not personally originate. Now, I must say to you at the outset, this lesson will not help you manage fear. It will not teach you how to cope with anxiety, nor how to make fear productive, nor how to use it as motivation. Those are all human adjustments, and they belong to the realm of psychology and behavior. What we are dealing with tonight is something far deeper. We are dealing with the question of whether fear has any legitimate place in consciousness at all. Jesus never instructed anyone to manage fear. He never said, fear less or fear wisely. He said, be not afraid. And he said it as a statement of spiritual law, not as advice. He said it because he knew something about the nature of reality that the world does not know. He knew that fear is not a condition, it is a belief, and beliefs have no power of their own. You will notice that when fear speaks to you, it never speaks in the present tense of God. It always speaks in the future or the past. It says, what if, or what might happen, or remember what happened before. But God is never found in what if or what was. God reveals himself only in the eternal now. As Scripture declares, I am that I am. Not I was, and not I shall be, but I am. This is why fear intensifies when thought is constantly projected outward toward images, reports, statistics, and opinions. The human mind, left to itself, is easily impressed. It was never designed to govern. It was designed to be an instrument. And when the mind is fed incessantly with appearances, it accepts those appearances as power. Not because they are power, but because the mind has not been taught to rest in God. In the infinite way, we are not taught to deny that the world seems troubled. We are taught to deny that appearances constitute reality. There is a great difference to say this is not happening when it appears to be happening is self-deception. But to say this appearance has no law, no cause, no substance, no continuity in God is spiritual understanding. The difficulty today is not that people are evil or ignorant or careless. The difficulty is that humanity has been trained to react, and reaction is the one thing that gives fear its apparent life. Fear does not need to be believed in order to operate. It only needs to be reacted to. The moment you tense inwardly, the moment you feel disturbed, the moment your peace is interrupted, fear has accomplished its purpose not because it is powerful, but because it has been accepted. You may recall that Jesus stood unmoved while storms raged, while crowds shouted, while threats surrounded him. This was not courage in the human sense. It was not bravery. It was understanding. He knew that the storm was not outside. It was a suggestion in collective thought. And because his consciousness was anchored in the Father, he did not participate in that suggestion. "Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith?" he asked. Faith in this teaching is not belief. Faith is the degree to which one is established in God consciousness. Faith is measured by reaction. Where there is reaction, faith is incomplete. Where there is non-reaction, the Christ is present. Now, I am not saying this to criticize you or to suggest that you should feel ashamed when fear arises. Fear arises because it is in the air of human thought. The work is not to condemn the fear, but to recognize its nature. When you recognize that fear is impersonal, you stop saying, "I am afraid," and begin to see fear is attempting to pass through consciousness. And the moment it is seen impersonally, it begins to lose its grip. The psalmist understood this when he wrote, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Notice he did not say there was no valley, nor that there was no shadow. He said it was a shadow, and a shadow has no substance. It exists only in relation to light. Where the light is understood, the shadow has no authority. We are living in a time when shadows are being magnified, enlarged, repeated, and projected constantly. And yet the light has not diminished. God has not withdrawn. The Christ has not gone silent. What has happened is that human attention has been trained outward instead of inward. And so the still, small voice is drowned out by noise. This lesson, then, is not about changing the world. It is not about fixing society. It is not about becoming indifferent or uninformed. It is about reclaiming your spiritual center. It is about learning, once again, how to abide where God abides, so that the world's agitation does not become your own. In a moment, we will speak of universal hypnotism, and you may find that term disturbing at first. But it is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to free you. For once you understand that much of what you feel is not yours, you will stop trying to heal yourself personally. You will stop struggling. And in that very stopping, the Christ will assert itself. As Isaiah wrote, "In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength," not in vigilance, not in constant awareness of danger, not in mental defense, but in quietness. Quietness is not absence of sound. It is absence of reaction. And where there is no reaction, there is no fear. Let us go forward, then, not with urgency, but with receptivity, not with effort, but with willingness to see. For the truth does not need to be forced upon consciousness. It reveals itself the moment resistance ceases. Now, if we are to go any further, We must settle this one point firmly in consciousness. Fear is never personal. As long as fear is believed to be personal, my fear, my anxiety, my weakness, it cannot be dissolved. It will be analyzed, justified, managed, resisted, or condemned, but never released. Spiritual freedom begins at the moment one discovers that fear does not belong to the individual at all. Fear is not born in you. It passes through you. It is not generated by your character, your history, your intelligence, or your circumstances. Fear is a belief state moving in human consciousness, much like a fog that drifts across a landscape. One person may be standing in it, another may have stepped out of it, but the fog itself did not originate in either of them. This is why two people can face the same situation and have entirely different experiences. One is disturbed, another remains at peace. The difference is not courage, strength, or morality. The difference is identification. One has identified with the appearance, the other has remained identified with God. Scripture reveals this more clearly than theology ever has. Job cried out, "The thing which I greatly feared is come upon me." He did not say, "The thing God sent upon me." He recognized, though dimly, that fear itself is a doorway through which appearances enter experience. Fear is not punished. Fear permits. It is an open door, not a crime. Jesus never treated fear as sin. He treated it as ignorance of God's presence. When he said, "Why reason ye in your hearts? Or why are ye troubled?" He was not rebuking character. He was correcting perception. He was always lifting thought from effect back to cause. The human mind has been trained to say, "I am afraid because of this condition, this news, this threat, this future possibility." But spiritual understanding reverses that statement. It sees that the condition appears because fear has already been accepted. This is why treating conditions never brings permanent peace. The root is never in the outer form. You see, fear always masquerades as realism. It says, "I am only responding to facts." But fear has never responded to facts. It responds to interpretations. Two people hear the same report. One sleeps peacefully, the other cannot rest. The report did not create fear. Fear interpreted the report. This is why the Master could stand before disease, sin, hatred, and death without inner disturbance. He did not see those things as facts. He saw them as claims. And a claim has no authority unless it is accepted. "Let not your heart be troubled," he said. He did not say, "Remove the trouble." He said, "Let it not grant it." In other words, do not grant it admission. Do not give it residence. The heart in Scripture is consciousness, not emotion. Jesus was saying, do not allow this suggestion to take root in awareness. Now, this may seem subtle, but it is the entire secret of spiritual dominion. Fear has no continuity of its own. It must be continually renewed by attention, reaction, and repetition. The moment fear is seen impersonally, it begins to weaken, because there is no longer an I claiming ownership of it. When you say, "I am afraid," fear has a home. When you see fear is presenting itself to consciousness, fear is already displaced. It has become an object of observation rather than a subject of identity. And consciousness never has to fight what it can see. This is what Paul meant when he wrote, "We have not received the spirit of fear." Fear is not a gift, not an inheritance, not a condition of being. It is not native to spiritual consciousness. It is foreign. And what is foreign cannot govern. God did not create fear. God did not authorize fear. God did not design man to live under fear. Fear is the byproduct of believing oneself to be separate from source. It is the shadow cast by the belief in separation. Where oneness is realized, fear has nothing to attach itself to. You may notice that fear always speaks in the language of selfhood. It says, what about me? What about my safety, my future, my body, my supply? But Christ consciousness does not live from the standpoint of a vulnerable self. It lives from the awareness, I and the Father are one, and where there is one, there is nothing to threaten. This does not mean that the human scene suddenly becomes perfect. It means that consciousness is no longer ruled by the human scene. The storm may still rage, but it is no longer your storm. The shadow may still appear, but it no longer darkens your awareness. The moment you understand that fear is not personal, you stop struggling with yourself. You stop asking, what is wrong with me that I feel this way? And you begin to rest in the truth that something impersonal is attempting to impose itself and can be gently declined. This is not willpower. This is not positive thinking. This is recognition. And recognition is always effortless. As the psalmist declared, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Not a future help, not a distant help, a present help. And where God is present, fear has no jurisdiction. In the next movement of this lesson, we must look directly at the mechanism through which fear spreads and maintains itself in the world, not to battle it, but to understand it. For understanding alone dissolves illusion. Now we come to a subject that, for many years, I hesitated to speak of openly, not because it is dangerous, but because it is easily misunderstood. And yet, without some understanding of this principle, the student will forever believe that his struggles are personal, his fears individual, and his failures self-caused. The term is universal hypnotism. Do not be disturbed by the word. It does not refer to mesmerism in the human sense, nor to any individual controlling another. It refers to the acceptance of appearance as power. Universal hypnotism is simply this: the collective belief of mankind that what is seen, heard, and reported constitutes reality. It is the agreement, mostly unconscious, that appearances have authority, that conditions have law, and that the outer world governs the inner life. This belief is so widespread, so ancient, and so rarely questioned that it passes for common sense. And yet, it is the very belief from which all fear, disease, and limitation arise. You see, hypnotism does not require consent. It only requires exposure. A child does not choose the beliefs of his environment. He absorbs them. A nation does not vote on its fears. It inherits them. And an individual does not deliberately decide to feel anxious. He simply breathes the mental atmosphere in which anxiety is normal. This is why fear can seize people who have every reason, humanly speaking, to feel secure. The mistake is not that people are weak. The mistake is that they do not know what they are dealing with. They imagine fear to be an emotion, a chemical reaction, or a psychological trait. But fear is none of these. Fear is a suggestion that says there is something outside you that has power over you. Jesus encountered this hypnotism everywhere he went. He found it in the synagogue, in the marketplace, in the home, and even among his disciples. When the disciples cried out in terror on the sea, he did not rebuke the storm. He rebuked them. Why? Because the storm had no power. The acceptance of the storm had power. Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? Faith, again, is not belief. Faith is the degree to which consciousness is anchored in God rather than in appearances. Where consciousness rests in God, hypnotic suggestion finds no entry point. Universal hypnotism operates through repetition. A thing heard once may be dismissed. A thing heard 100 times begins to feel true. A thing heard daily becomes unquestioned. This is why constant exposure to disturbing images and narratives creates a sense of inevitability. The mind begins to say, this must be real, because it is everywhere. But truth has never depended on numbers. Error has. The prophets understood this. Isaiah warned, say ye not a confederacy to all them to whom this people shall say a confederacy. Neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. In other words, do not consent to collective panic. Do not join the emotional agreement of the masses. Why? Because God consciousness is not collective. It is individual. Hypnotism works only when consciousness is outward turned. It has no power over the soul that is inwardly attentive to God. This is why the practice of stillness is not a luxury, but a necessity. Be still and know that I am God. Not think God, not believe God. Know. And knowing occurs only in stillness. Now, understand this clearly. Hypnotism is not evil. It has no intelligence. It has no will. It is not an opposing force. It is simply a false sense of reality, maintained by attention. The moment attention is withdrawn, hypnotism collapses, just as darkness disappears when light is present. You do not fight darkness. You introduce light. This is why spiritual teaching never seeks to improve appearances. It seeks to awaken consciousness. Once consciousness awakens, appearances reorganize themselves or disappear altogether. But if you attempt to fix the appearance while remaining hypnotized by it, you will fight shadows endlessly. Many people ask, how do I protect myself from these influences? And the answer is, you cannot protect a person, but you can awaken consciousness. The awakened consciousness does not need protection. It abides in God, and there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. Not because danger is absent, but because danger has no entrance into realized oneness. You will notice that hypnotism always speaks loudly, urgently, insistently. God never does. God whispers. God waits. God does not intrude. This is why the Christ can be overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. It does not compete for attention. It reveals itself only to receptivity. When you feel overwhelmed by the world, do not ask, what is happening out there? Ask instead, where is my attention resting? For where attention rests, experience forms. This is not a technique. It is a law of consciousness. The student who understands universal hypnotism does not become fearful of it. He becomes indifferent to it. He learns to observe without absorbing, to see without accepting, to hear without reacting. And in this non-reaction, the Christ asserts itself naturally. In the next movement of our work, we must examine the one thing that gives hypnotism its apparent power: reaction. For without reaction, hypnotism is nothing more than noise. If there is one point that must be grasped, not intellectually, but inwardly, it is this: fear has no power of its own. It borrows all the power it seems to possess from reaction. Without reaction, fear is a whisper without an echo. With reaction, it becomes an experience. And so the real work is never with fear itself, but with our response to it. Reaction is participation. Reaction is consent. Reaction is the moment when consciousness says, often without words, this has authority over me. And the moment that thought is entertained, fear appears to move from suggestion into experience. Not because fear has changed, but because consciousness has shifted its allegiance. This is why two people can hear the same alarming report and have opposite results. One is inwardly disturbed for days. The other acknowledges it and goes on in peace. The report did not determine the outcome. Reaction did. Reaction is the door through which appearances enter. Jesus revealed this principle with startling clarity when he said, "Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him." This has been misunderstood for centuries. He was not instructing compromise with evil. He was revealing that resistance presupposes reality. To resist something is to grant it presence and power. To recognize its nothingness is to dissolve it. Reaction is always rooted in the belief of two powers. It says, here is God and here is something opposed to God. But the first commandment has never been repealed. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is not a moral law. It is a statement of fact. There is only one power. And whatever claims power apart from God must be illusion. Now notice carefully, reaction does not always look dramatic. It may appear as subtle anxiety, constant checking, nervous anticipation, or even excessive concern disguised as responsibility. Reaction can look very reasonable, but wherever peace is absent, reaction is present. The Christ consciousness does not react because it knows there is nothing to react to. It sees appearances as appearances. It does not deny them, but it does not consult them for truth. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is spiritual perception, seeing from cause, not from effect. You will recall that when Lazarus was reported dead, Jesus did not rush. He did not grieve. He did not explain. He remained still. This was not indifference. It was dominion. He refused to accept the report as final. He did not react, and therefore the appearance had no authority in his consciousness. Reaction always short-circuits spiritual awareness. The moment we react, we are no longer listening. We are responding from memory, from fear, from conditioning. And in that moment, the still, small voice is drowned out. God does not speak over reaction. God speaks in silence. This is why the practice of non-reaction is central, not as discipline, but as understanding. When you no longer believe that appearances require a response, you naturally rest. And in resting, you discover that life is governing itself. Many students attempt to overcome fear by affirmations, denials, or declarations. These may bring temporary relief, but they often leave reaction untouched. The infinite way does not teach us to fight fear with truth. It teaches us to see fear as unreal. When something is seen as unreal, it does not need to be fought. The psalmist expressed this beautifully. I will both lay me down in peace and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. Notice the word only. Safety is not produced by vigilance, planning, or constant awareness of danger. It is the natural state of consciousness resting in God. Reaction always assumes responsibility for outcomes. Non-reaction trusts God. This is the difference between human living and spiritual living. Human living says, I must watch, control, manage, and prepare. Spiritual living says, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. Do not misunderstand this. Non-reaction is not neglect. It is not passivity. It is alignment. It is the refusal to grant authority to anything that does not originate in God. It is the calm assurance that divine law is operative, even when appearances suggest otherwise. When fear arises, then do not ask, how do I get rid of this? Ask instead, am I reacting or am I resting? The answer to that question will tell you everything. Reaction feeds fear. Rest dissolves it. As Isaiah declared, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Not whose circumstances are perfect, not whose future is secure, but whose mind is stayed, anchored, settled in God. In our next movement, we must look at one of the most misunderstood teachings of the Master, because without understanding it, students often attempt to practice non-reaction and end up suppressing fear instead of transcending it. There are few statements of the Master that have caused more confusion than these simple words: resist, not evil. They have been interpreted as weakness, as submission, as moral indifference, or even as encouragement to injustice. And yet, when rightly understood, they are the very foundation of spiritual dominion. Without this understanding, the student will struggle endlessly trying to overcome fear while secretly granting it power. Let us be clear at the outset. Jesus was not saying that evil is good, nor that wrong should be accepted, nor that one should submit to harm. He was revealing something infinitely deeper, that evil has no reality to resist. Resistance assumes presence. Resistance assumes power. Resistance assumes a second force standing over against God. And this assumption, however well-intentioned, is the root of bondage. The moment you resist anything, you have already accepted it as real. You have placed it on the same level as truth. You have said inwardly, this has power, and I must do something about it. But spiritual understanding begins with the realization that there is nothing to do about unreality except to see it for what it is. This is why Jesus did not resist disease. He did not resist sin. He did not resist hatred. He did not resist death. He looked through them. He recognized them as appearances without law, without substance, without continuity in God. And because he did not resist, he was not entangled. The world believes that if we do not fight evil, evil will triumph. Jesus revealed the opposite. It is precisely our fighting that gives evil its seeming life. For in fighting, we acknowledge. In acknowledging, we empower. Whatsoever a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not what he fights, not what he hates, but what he accepts as reality in consciousness. Now, this teaching cannot be practiced mentally. If you attempt to decide not to resist, you will suppress fear rather than transcend it. Suppression is still reaction. Suppression is fear pretending to be spiritual. True non-resistance is effortless because it is born of understanding, not will. When the student truly sees that evil is not a power, Resistance drops away naturally. You do not resist a mirage once you know it is a mirage. You do not fight a shadow once you recognize that it has no substance. You simply walk on. The Master demonstrated this again and again. When accused falsely, he did not defend himself. When threatened, he did not argue. When crucified, he did not curse. This was not passivity. This was authority. He knew that nothing could touch the Christ, because the Christ is not in the realm of appearances. Paul understood this when he wrote, "Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." Notice, he did not say, fight evil with good. He said overcome, which means to rise above. Good does not battle evil. Good reveals evil's nothingness. The moment you understand resist not evil, fear loses its strategy. Fear depends on conflict. Fear needs opposition. Fear thrives on the belief that something must be confronted, stopped, prevented, or controlled. But when fear meets non-resistance, not apathy, but spiritual recognition, it collapses. This does not mean that one becomes careless or reckless in human affairs. Human wisdom still functions. Practical steps are taken when necessary, but inwardly there is no battle. Outward action proceeds from inward peace, not inward agitation. Jesus said, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you." The world's peace comes from winning battles, resolving threats, securing outcomes. Christ's peace comes from knowing that there is nothing outside God's government. When you no longer resist evil, you no longer give it a name, a history, or a future. You see it as a passing suggestion, and suggestions cannot dominate consciousness that is awake. The infinite way does not teach indifference to suffering. It teaches freedom from the belief that suffering has divine authorization. It teaches compassion without fear, awareness without absorption, presence without participation in illusion. In the next movement, we must bring this understanding into daily living, into what we allow, into thought, into the constant stream of impressions that seek our attention. For even when the principle is understood, careless exposure can reopen the door to reaction. Now we come to a point where many students feel resistance, not because the principle is difficult, but because it touches daily habit. And yet, if spiritual understanding is to move beyond the lecture and into life, this must be faced gently, honestly, and without condemnation. The mind, like the body, lives on what it consumes. And whatever the mind feeds upon, consciousness accepts as important. This is not a moral issue. It is not about good information versus bad information. It is about where consciousness is dwelling. The mind was never intended to be a storehouse of appearances. It was meant to be an avenue of awareness through which truth reveals itself. When it is filled constantly with images of danger, conflict, and prediction, it becomes noisy, reactive, and incapable of hearing God. You may notice that the more one watches, reads, or listens to disturbing material, the more one feels the need to keep watching. This is not because the information is helpful, but because fear demands reinforcement. Fear is never satisfied with a single impression. It must be fed repeatedly in order to maintain itself. This is why anxiety increases, not decreases, with constant exposure. Scripture understood this long before modern psychology. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not as a man acts, not as a man intends, but as he thinks. And thinking in this sense is not deliberate reasoning. It is what consciousness quietly accepts and rehearses. Now, let me be very clear. The infinite way does not teach ignorance of the world. It teaches non-absorption. There is a difference between being aware and being impressed. Awareness sees. Impression accepts. Awareness observes. Impression reacts. Awareness leaves consciousness free. Impression binds it. When Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life," he was not advocating irresponsibility. He was revealing that thought, filled with concern, is thought withdrawn from God. And where God is not consciously acknowledged, fear rushes in to fill the vacuum. Many people believe they must remain constantly informed in order to be safe. But safety has never come from information. Safety comes from alignment with divine law. You could know every possible danger and still live in fear, or you could know God and live in peace amid uncertainty. This is why the prophets continually warned against consulting appearances for truth. "Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils," Isaiah wrote, not because man is evil, but because human perception is limited. When consciousness rests in reports, it rises and falls with reports. When consciousness rests in God, it remains steady. The mental diet, then, is not about restriction. It is about preference. What do you prefer, to nourish fear or faith, agitation or peace, speculation or presence? This choice is not made once. It is made moment by moment, and it is always made quietly, inwardly, often without words. You may find that as consciousness becomes more established in God, the appetite for disturbing impressions naturally falls away. This is not discipline. It is transformation. The soul loses interest in noise when it has tasted stillness. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Once tasted, the world's clamor loses its appeal. If you find yourself troubled, do not condemn yourself. Simply recognize that something has entered thought that does not belong there. Withdraw attention gently, without struggle. Return inwardly to that place where God is known, not spoken about. For God is not found in accumulation of knowledge, but in quiet awareness. The mind that is fed constantly outward becomes restless. The mind that is periodically returned inward becomes transparent. And through that transparency, the Christ shines unobstructed. In the next movement of our work, we must speak of the pause, that sacred interval between impression and reaction, where freedom is either lost or regained. For it is there, in that almost unnoticed moment, that consciousness chooses its allegiance. There is a moment so brief that it is often unnoticed between the arrival of a suggestion and the acceptance of it. This moment is not measured by time. It is measured by awareness. It is the interval in which consciousness either yields to appearance or abides in God. And in this pause, freedom is either lost or regained. Most people believe they react because they must. They say, "It happens so fast, I have no choice." But reaction is not automatic. Habitual, yes, but not inevitable. Reaction has been practiced for so long that it feels instantaneous. Yet, even the smallest pause reveals that reaction is a decision, not a law. This pause is not something to be created. It already exists. It is the natural stillness of consciousness before thought takes over. Children live in it often. Mystics live in it deliberately. And all of us touch it whenever we are suddenly quiet, moved, or inwardly attentive. It is the place where God is known. When a disturbing impression comes, whether through sight, sound, memory, or report, the human mind rushes to interpret. It says, this means danger. This means trouble. This means I must respond. But if, instead of following that rush, you remain still, even for an instant, you will feel a settling. In that settling, fear does not complete its sentence. This is not a technique. It is not a practice to be strained after. It is a recognition of something already present. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Returning, not advancing. Rest, not effort. In that inner pause, you are not thinking of God. You are not affirming truth. You are simply being, and being is the language God understands. Words belong to the mind. Silence belongs to spirit. You may notice that fear cannot survive in silence. Fear needs commentary. It needs narration. It needs the mind to keep speaking on its behalf. The moment commentary stops, fear loses continuity. It fades not dramatically, but naturally, like a sound that is no longer sustained. Jesus practiced this pause continually. When confronted with accusation, he stooped and wrote in the sand. When questioned aggressively, he was silent. When pressured to act prematurely, he withdrew. These were not evasions. They were returns to center. He would not allow the world's urgency to dictate his consciousness. I can of mine own self do nothing, he said. That statement is meaningless to the active mind, but everything to the awakened soul. It means that personal reaction has no authority. Action flows only from divine impulse. In this pause, you are not passive. You are receptive. You are listening not for words, but for alignment. And alignment does not announce itself. It is felt as peace without reason, confidence without explanation, assurance without prediction. If you attempt to hold the pause, you will lose it. Holding is effort. Effort belongs to the personal sense. The pause appears when effort ceases. It is entered by yielding, not by grasping. Many students ask, how long should I stay in the pause? And the answer is, as long as it lasts. Sometimes it is a breath. Sometimes it is several minutes. Sometimes it becomes a way of living. The duration is not important. What matters is that consciousness has tasted its true habitation. Once you have known this pause, even briefly, you will recognize reaction more quickly. You will feel the difference between being centered and being pulled outward. And this recognition in itself is protection, not protection from events, but protection from bondage. The Lord is in his holy temple, that all the earth keep silence before him. The holy temple is not a building. It is consciousness. And when consciousness is silent, God is known not as an idea, but as life itself. In the next movement of our work, we must see how this inner anchoring allows one to live fully in the world without absorbing the world, how one can be present, active, and compassionate without being governed by collective fear. There comes a point in spiritual unfoldment where the student realizes that withdrawal from the world is neither possible nor desirable. We are not called to escape human experience, but to be free within it. The error has never been that we live in the world. The error is that we allow the world to live in us. And when the world lives in us, its fears, its pressures, and its conflicts begin to speak as our own thoughts. Jesus prayed, I pray not that thou shouldest take them out of the world, but that thou shouldest keep them from the evil. He was not referring to people or events, but to the belief in a power apart from God. To be kept from the evil is to remain inwardly untouched by appearances, even while moving among them. This is the distinction that must be understood. Compassion is not absorption. Awareness is not agreement. Presence does not require participation in fear. One may see suffering clearly, respond appropriately, and yet remain inwardly at peace. This peace is not indifference, it is clarity. And clarity is the foundation of true service. When consciousness is anchored in God, the world is seen differently. Problems no longer appear as personal threats. They appear as opportunities for truth to be realized, not realized outwardly first, but inwardly. And when inward realization occurs, outer adjustment follows in whatever way divine law ordains. The student who absorbs the world's fear believes he is being loving. In reality, he is being mesmerized. Fear does not help those who suffer. It multiplies suffering. Peace, on the other hand, is transmissible. It communicates itself silently. It blesses without words. It heals without effort. You may recall that when Jesus approached those in need, he was never agitated. He did not mirror their fear. He did not join their panic. He brought something else into the situation, a consciousness that knew God was present, and that knowing was sufficient. Be in the world, but not of it. This does not mean living two lives, one spiritual, one human. It means living one life from a higher standpoint. It means allowing divine consciousness to be the atmosphere in which all human activity takes place. When you stop absorbing the world, you do not become less effective, you become more. Your actions are no longer fueled by anxiety. They arise from wisdom, and wisdom does not hurry. There is a great difference between information and identification. You may know what is happening without becoming what is happening. You may respond without reacting. You may act without fear. This is the freedom Christ promised when he said, Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Not protect you, free you. As long as consciousness believes it must carry the world's burdens, it will be heavy. When consciousness rests in God, burdens are lifted not by effort, but by recognition that they were never ours to carry. The more deeply you abide inwardly, the more naturally you will disengage from unnecessary mental entanglement. This is not detachment from life, it is detachment from illusion. And illusion is always what drains vitality. In the next movement of our work, we must come to the heart of this teaching, the realization that Christ is not a shield placed around you, but a government established within you. This changes everything. Most people, even sincere students of truth, unconsciously seek Christ as a protector, something that will stand between them and danger, between them and loss, between them and uncertainty. And while this seems natural, it is not the revelation of Christ consciousness. Christ is not a shield placed around you. Christ is the government established within you. Jesus did not live safely because he was guarded from events. He lived freely because his consciousness was governed by God. He did not wait to see what would happen and then ask God to intervene. He lived from the certainty that the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. This is not protection after the fact. It is dominion at the source. When Christ is understood as inner government, fear loses its reference point. Fear always looks outward for causes and inward for vulnerability. Christ consciousness looks inward for cause and finds none other than God. Where God governs, there is no opposing jurisdiction. This is why Jesus could say, "My kingdom is not of this world." He was not speaking of a future heaven or a distant realm. He was describing a state of consciousness that does not derive its law from appearances. The kingdom within is self-sustaining. It does not rise and fall with circumstances. When consciousness is governed by Christ, safety is not negotiated. It is inherent. Peace is not defended. It is natural. Guidance is not sought anxiously. It unfolds. The world believes safety comes from preparation, prediction, and control. Christ reveals that safety comes from alignment. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Notice that commitment precedes manifestation. Trust precedes outcome. This inner government does not eliminate human decision-making. It purifies it. Action arises without fear. Choice is made without panic. Movement occurs without strain. And because fear is absent, mistakes lose their sting and correction is gentle. To live under Christ's government is to relinquish the false belief that you must oversee life personally. It is the surrender of the anxious self to divine order. And this surrender is not loss, it is liberation. Now let us be very clear. The freedom we are speaking of is not achieved by changing habits alone. One may turn off every device, avoid every report, and still live in fear. Fear does not originate in media. Media merely reflects and amplifies what consciousness is already prepared to accept. The true end of doom scrolling is not behavioral reform. It is identity shift. When you no longer identify as a vulnerable self navigating a dangerous world, the appetite for constant monitoring disappears naturally. There is nothing left to watch for. As long as you believe something out there can determine my well-being, attention will keep returning outward. But when you realize my life is hid with Christ in God, attention settles. The need to check, to scan, to anticipate fades not by discipline, but by irrelevance. This is why Jesus could say, "Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature?" He was not criticizing thought. He was exposing its limits. Thought cannot secure life. Only life can secure life. When identity shifts from human selfhood to spiritual being, behavior reorganizes itself without effort. You do not decide to disengage. You simply lose interest. What once felt urgent now feels loud. What once felt necessary now feels intrusive. This is not withdrawal from responsibility. It is the assumption of a higher responsibility, the responsibility to remain conscious of God. And when that responsibility is honored, lesser responsibilities fall into place. We do not end this lesson with conclusions, summaries, or instructions. Spiritual truth does not conclude. It unfolds. What has been spoken tonight is not something to remember, but something to notice. In the days ahead, observe not critically, not anxiously, but gently. Notice when reaction arises. Notice when attention is pulled outward. Notice when peace is disturbed. And in that noticing, do nothing. Do not correct. Do not judge. Do not resist. Simply be aware. Awareness itself is light, and light does not argue with darkness. It reveals its absence. Remember this: fear is not overcome. Fear is outgrown. It fades as consciousness rises. And consciousness rises not by effort, but by resting in what already is. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. This is not a promise for tomorrow. It is a statement of present law. Where peace is held, God is active. Where God is active, fear has no assignment. Let us leave this work unfinished so that it may continue within you, not as thought, but as awareness, not as effort, but as recognition.